Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Constant Reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by the shadowy figure that I follow down the road. His name, of course, is Mr. Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Shouldn't you be the shadowy figure that I'm following down the road?
I mean, that probably would have made better sense, but it didn't fit with the structure of the introduction.
That's true. But what do I represent?
Nobody knows. We'll try to answer that question and more today on Kingslingers.
All right.
Matt, we're back. We took a week off. We're back in the saddle.
Yeah. Oh, the longest vacation we've ever taken in our entire lives.
Yeah, I mean, because it was only 1 week for Kingslingers, but you left midweek.
I was
a couple weeks
gone
ago.
for a full 12 days, actually.
Yeah, it's wild. It's insane.
Yeah. I know.
Don't do that again.
I honestly don't think I've ever taken a vacation this long before. So.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're back now. We're ready to go. We're excited. We had to pause the long walk right before the ending, but we're here. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to finish Stephen King, Richard Bachman's The Long Walk. We're going to be talking about chapters 14 through 18 of Richard Bachman's Walking Simulator novel. Matt, this was the end of the book. Of course, we have a lot to say about the end, and we'll save that for the end. But what did you think of these 5 chapters that wrapped everything up for us?
I loved it. I love this book. I thought this was a fantastic ending. It really stuck the landing in terms of what I not what I wanted, but what I needed, which I think is kind of great, because I think at various times on this podcast I've sort of said something like, and then we'll get some kind of catharsis, presumably at some point. and that was before I really realized what kind of story this was. And it's the kind of story where you don't get a catharsis, and that's the point.
Yeah.
And understanding that, it was a perfect ending. And I just really love this book. I think this is a amazing book. The only thing that makes me not rush to recommend it to people is that it is a harrowing ordeal. So maybe I did recommend it to my dad, who read the whole thing.
Nice.
And that was cool. So now I've been able to talk about it with him. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me so much about what you said about this book while you were reading it was in the early chapters of it, you talked about how you felt you were surprised at how optimistic this book was. I think that was specifically talking about early on in the walk, where the boys are actually working together and seemingly teaming up to overcome these horrible things that are being thrown in their way. And you read optimism in that. And I was a little shocked at the time because I knew where this book goes. But I think you were right in there, and that's the feeling that the book wants to leave you with. And I think that's part of the long game the book is playing, actually, is that it feeds you this kind of hopeful optimism that these boys have going into this thing, and then summarily destroys it over the last few chapters.
Yeah, I guess I'm still in the midst of processing all of this, because I guess I won't totally reject what I was trying to say along the lines of, like, King is writing about this, like, spark of love and like brotherly love and camaraderie that exists between people, and this kind of inherent goodness to people. But then the whole book is about just sort of grinding that into the pavement, literally.
Yep. How the system itself kind of rips that whole thing apart. Yeah.
So it's like saying one kind of optimistic thing about, like, humans do have this sort of spark of goodness in them, you could say. But however, etc. There's a lot of bad stuff in there too, and then we create these systems for ourselves that kind of make it impossible for us to just live our lives.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think we're going to have a lot to say about the ending. As I said earlier, I think we'll save that for the end of the show itself. But it's a controversial ending for sure. This one is. I think there's many opinions out there that I've seen about this book. Probably the most prevalent opinion I've seen about this book is that people really, really like it. They really love it. But a lot of people aren't happy with how it ends. And I agree with you on the high level. And I'm kind of looking forward to us really diving into this ending and getting to where we see that this is not just the perfect ending for this novel, in my opinion, but the only one, that it couldn't have gone any other way, actually.
I totally agree with that, because any other way that I can imagine that would have like quote unquote satisfied me, it's like, well, that's horrible. Like that's just not the story this is. Wouldn't have worked at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, we have a few chapters to walk through before we get there, though. So let's get going, Matt.
Okay.
We begin the end with chapter 14. The walk continues as the kids are now heading towards Augusta. And the first thing we need to talk about here, Matt, I think, is Ray's and therefore Stephen King's depiction of what he calls the capital C crowd. I'm going to read this section here because I really like it. The town itself had been swallowed, strangled, and buried. In a very real sense, there was no Augusta, and there were no more fat ladies or pretty girls or pompous men or wet-crotched children waving puffy clouds of cotton candy. There was no bustling Italian man here to throw slices of watermelon. Only Crowd, a creature with no body, no head, no mind. Crowd was nothing but a voice and an eye, and it was not surprising that Crowd was both God and Mammon. Garrity felt it. He knew the others were feeling it. It was like walking between giant electrical pylons, feeling the tingles and shocks standing every hair on end, making the tongue fitter nuttily in the mouth, making the eyes seem to crackle and shoot off sparks as they rolled in their beds of moisture. Crowd was to be pleased. Crowd was to be worshipped and feared. Ultimately, Crowd was to be made sacrifice unto. Love this kind of personification of the crowd. What was your thoughts on this whole part?
I thought this is a quintessentially Bachman take on King's recurring motif of towns. Really, I mean, we're talking about a town. We're talking about Augusta, but Augusta has transformed into Crowd. But again, we're talking about towns as being alive, having their own personalities and tendencies and secrets and their own monsters and their own hidden evil. Now, it's not exactly the same as, for example, the take that we saw in Salem's Lot. It's a much darker, much more primal sort of huge interpretation of this evil. It's not literally supernatural, but it's evoking all of these supernatural images. And it's just a beautiful, painting in words. I love it when King does this kind of thing.
Me too. And I think this is one of the things that I think benefits from King's decision to kind of keep the world around the walk as opaque and undefined as possible, is that, like, I don't think so. When you look at this book, and now that you've finished it, we can kind of not fully step back, but look at the book as a whole and be like, I don't think The Long Walk serves as any kind of specific political critique, right? I mean, it's like anti-fascism, sure, but like, okay, like what most things are anti-fascism, right? Like there's not too many bits of literature that you're going to see and they're like, no, actually fascism, good.
Yeah.
But I think the cool thing that it does, because the actual governing body of this world is so opaque and undefined, allows the government to just really be a backdrop for a specific kind of cultural or societal critique. Like, this isn't just about how, like, conservatism is bad or capitalism is bad. We don't actually know enough about this world to definitively point at those things and say, yes, look, this is showing that it's bad. Instead, what we're left with is looking at people, looking at society, and looking at things like this capital C crowd is like, what kind of society would allow something like this to happen every year? What society would allow us to kill our young men for entertainment, for sport? And the answer is this one, right? This exact one, this thing that turns into this horrible, horrifying crowd. I love that, actually.
Yeah. Well, and I think it enables us to look at our own society and not have the convenient escape of being like, well, we're not a fascist state, so we it's like, no, like we look a lot like this state, actually. And if you continue the metaphor of like the way we treat our young people and sending them off to war, it's like, yeah, we are Crowd. We're not as like overtly vicious, but that doesn't mean we're not staring at the television watching the horrible news of the war roll in and kind of feeling a little vicarious thrill about it, right? I think connecting to the previous paragraph, Bachman, quote unquote Bachman here is saying that isms aren't really the culprit, fascism. communism, whatever. These are not the problem. Like, the problem is human nature. The problem is that we are this creature that it was like we're like an organism that like gloms into a giant colony organism that's a monster. And maybe we're kind of okay when we're on our own. Like, when we're on our own, we can have this spark of humanity and goodness and the white that King does write about in so many of his books, including this one, where there's an innate goodness. But as soon as we succumb to crowd, which we are very predisposed to do, we become part of that monster. We're not this pure angel that's beset by, the specter of fascism. It's like, no, we're just a thing that is a piece of a monster, and that's what we are. That's definitely cynical, but I think he is basically saying that.
Yeah, and I think that aligns perfectly with what we've seen from King in other places, right? I think that aligns with kind of some of the stuff that The Stand is saying, right? That this idea that like society in The Stand, as it rebuilds itself, is going to possibly fall into the same traps it had before. And like the plea at the end of that novel is like, hopefully we can learn from this, but just the idea of gathering people together, you start to gather people together and the same problems start to arise, the same flaws in people start to arise. And yeah, I think that's a fascinating view on this whole thing. I thought for whatever reason, I was thinking about Hearts in Atlantis a lot while reading this section. And I think it's specifically because the part in that novel where King talks about kind of the failure of his generation to bring great change to the world, like this idea of that, this being a very politically tumultuous time, and there's this opportunity that the young people of the time felt that they were going to change the world. We're going to tear down these corrupt systems. We're going to put fair, equitable things in their place. And in that book, he talks about how his generation grew up, they got old, and they gave it all up, and they just kind of got consumed by that system. And I feel like this depiction of crowd is very much part and parcel of that idea, right? Is this idea that the folly of people being one of the biggest problems the world has.
Yeah, I would not have made that connection, but I love that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. This kind of ties into what we're talking about. I just really liked the sentence, so I wanted to pull it here. Somehow they understood that the circle between death worship and death wish had been completed for another year, and the crowd went completely loopy, convulsing itself into greater and greater paroxysms. I don't know, like the word choices there is just great. The circle between death worship and death wish. I just really like that wording. And also the consistent way with King, from this point on in the novel, really describes the crowd not as any individual. I think we actually, with the exception of Jane and his mother, or Jan and his mother, I think we stop seeing any single person in the crowd individually at this point. It is all just become this one mass, this one monster.
Yeah, you're right. It's interesting because Stebbins earlier said you won't see the crowd. And I think my brain at that point in time was like, oh yeah, it'll be like they're not there. It's like, no, it's not that they're not there. It's that they're an indistinguishable mass of just like non-human substance or something. I agree with you. The word choice there was great. The death worship, I think, is a fantastic phrase to use there because it's so spot on, continuing the metaphor of how our culture talks about military sacrifice and just kind of sacrifice in general, but particularly military sacrifice, where it's this kind of worship of death. I mean, it's a very dark way of saying it, but it's a fair, especially within the context of what he's trying to say with this novel. I think it's a totally appropriate phrasing.
I totally agree. Yeah. It's it's dark. It's horrifying, but there's definitely some truth to it. Yeah. And then Matt, we come to this moment, and God, we're going to have to spend some time on this. So McVries is talking to Garrity, and he says that Collie Parker thinks that he and Garrity are queer for each other. And his response to that is, hey, maybe he's right. Maybe that's why I've saved you all these times, Garrity. And then he turns to him and says, would you let me jerk you off? And so we've had this through line throughout this novel of this kind of homophobia present in this character. And here it kind of is being brought to the forefront. So I'm curious what you think we're doing here, Matt, because, Garrity thinks to himself, he's like, no, I don't want McVries to touch him. Not in that way. But he ends up just screaming, do whatever you want, because he's just tired and sick of this whole conversation. So I don't know, Matt, what do you think we're doing here?
I don't know exactly. So I'm going to try to approach it from a couple different angles, maybe.
Sure.
To step back, seems like the bond between McVries and Garrity is representative of the bond between soldiers, brothers in arms, the kind of deep trust and brotherly love that can form in these situations. It's just so powerful that it might rival or even exceed the feelings that a man might have for his own, girlfriend or family. And that feeling, that immense brotherly love is very confusing if you live in a culture that doesn't really have the words for this sort of bond, or at least doesn't talk about it very much. We threw away all of the good words like eros and shit. See, I can't even remember them. We used to have, not we, but the Greeks had words for all the different kinds of love. We don't have, we don't use those anymore. And so anyway, sexuality, questioning of sexuality gets kind of sucked up into the conversation because you don't know how to metabolize these strong feelings that your culture kind of frowns upon. As you just said, right? Garrity is a massive homophobe. Like this is not me. Like, this is not an opinion. This is like, that's what he is. That's it. But like that is established through a very sympathetic framing where we understand that it's very important in his society to distance himself from any kind of sexual shame whatsoever. His early experiences with his kid with his friend when they were kids were very traumatizing for him.
Yeah.
And so it's understandable from his perspective why he would have this homophobia. It's been traumatized into him.
Yeah.
And I can remembering some of my memories from Boy Scouts, how there was just this like latent terror of being perceived as in any way sexually unusual. I can see that, right? It kind of makes sense to me. I think King leaves it intentionally ambiguous whether McVries like actually has sexual feelings for Garrity. In addition to the deep friendship that he feels, or whether he's just kind of fucking with Garrity. I don't know. I don't even really have an opinion. I guess I lean toward it being the latter, that he's just he just kind of asked the question to ask it to see what Garrity would say. I don't think that McVries has been pining for Garrity personally, but I can totally see somebody having the opposite reading. What do you think?
I mean, I think the book kind of makes that explicit in that, like, the conversation that he has with, I believe it's Parker right after this, it might be Baker, is that like, oh, McVries is still doing it, right? He's still just trying to hurt himself. Like that like the McVries thing this whole time has been cause as much pain to himself as possible, and he's just trying to make people mad at him and make people hate him, and so he's just fucking with him in that way. I think it is a completely fair read to say that one or both of these characters has, latent or present homosexual feelings towards each other. I think that's a completely fair read. I do think that this is my read on this, at least from the Garrity perspective, is that, he's very kind of sexually traumatized by his childhood, and he doesn't know what to do with all these feelings. And he's made it clear to kind of everyone around him that he has this trauma, and they are all exploiting it in different ways. Like in a couple minutes, we'll see Stebbins really attack him on this specifically. And does that mean he's gay? I don't think so, but I certainly think that would be a completely fair read of these characters.
I guess I would say, like, if Garrity's closeted, he's so closeted that it's hidden from even himself, because we see his own, we see his thoughts, and we see him lust after the women on the sidelines. He's looking at the women. He's fantasizing about the women. He's not, he's thinking about his girlfriend. He's thinking sexually about his girlfriend. He's not thinking sexually about McVries. This is just accurate reporting of what the text is doing with Garrity specifically.
I do think there could be an argument there that's like, perhaps thus thou dost lust too much. Like it's just like you're overdoing it to the point of trying too hard a little bit, which I think again will be a fair read. But I'm more inclined to side with he's not, but he's so fucking traumatized by anything sexual that, like, that he's had it kind of ingrained in him that even to be called gay or to be assumed towards that, he has this incredibly visceral negative reaction to it. And I don't think it's just because it's true and he's closeted. I think it's just because of, yeah, I mean, he keeps going back to this one event with his friend, right, where they got naked in front of each other to look at their parts, and his reaction to that was to beat the shit out of him with a rifle. So he's just incredibly fucked up in the head when it comes to sexuality, for sure.
Yeah, I do like to riff on what you said there, like the idea that he is kind of like oversexed as a method of overcompensating for any possible chance that somebody's going to perceive him as not being a man, because he thinks that he's turning into a sex maniac, and it's like, yeah, maybe that's part of his sort of way of covering, a trauma response, if you will.
Yeah. And on the McVries side, I think you could maybe convince me more that he actually does have some of these feelings, partially because we haven't actually seen inside his head, so we don't have any specific contrary evidence. But I do also just like this idea that McVries is just a guy that wants to hurt himself as much as possible, like that he's here to just punish himself, and he's going to do it in any possible way he can, which is possibly anger Garrity so much that he destroys this friendship that he has with him, this last friendship that he will ever have.
Yeah, he does seem to be trying to. Yeah.
All right. So Garrity hears that Barkovich is in bad shape, and he drops back to look for him. I think my initial reaction to that was, why are you doing that? And then we'll see very quickly why. Actually, we see at first Barkovich is kind of acting like the guy we saw him at the beginning of the walk. He's kind of all bluster. He says to Garrity, just 35 left, walk down. And this perhaps is why Garrity decides to, sensing Barkovich's weakness, really turn the screws into him. He says to him, this is horrible, Matt. He says, I thought maybe you'd wish for friends, Garrity said sadly. A heady sense of triumph, suffocating and enthralling, roared through him. Friends? Because you don't have any, Garrity said pityingly. We'll all be glad to see you die. No one's going to miss you, Gary. Maybe I'll walk behind you and spit on your brains after they blow them all over the road. Maybe I'll do that. Maybe we all will. It was crazy. Crazy as if his whole head was flying off. It was like when he had swung the barrel of the air rifle at Jimmy. The blood... his whole head had gone heat hazy with the savage primal justice of it. So, gosh, Matt, there's a lot of psychological stuff happening here with Garrity. What do you think? What's our pal Ray doing here?
I'm not too sure. I basically think that this is a turning point for Garrity of a sort, where, in fact, in this moment, I think this is kind of almost an act break, if we're going to say this story has those at all, because Garrity sort of breaks here. Like he seems to have lost whatever residual moral grounding he was holding on to, and he just kind of knowingly destroys Barkovich and kind of says these things to him that he knows are going to destroy him. He does to Barkovich the kind of thing that he would have condemned Barkovich for doing to someone else earlier. I don't know. Am I being too hard on him?
No, I don't think so. I think the interesting question here is why? Why is he doing this? And I think it goes, and the one thing I love about what Stephen King does sometimes in these passages is he gives us a hint at it, right? Like that, what is the thing that Garrity is thinking about as he savages Barkovich like this? Well, he's thinking about that time he hit Jimmy on the head with the air rifle. And so you're looking at, what is he doing right now? Oh, well, he's having a visceral reaction to being made sexually uncomfortable, because that's his MO, right? Like McVries made him uncomfortable. He brought forward this sexual feeling, or this thing that made him uncomfortable, and his reaction to that was violent. Not direct violence here, because he can't do that, but emotional, mental violence that he turns on Garrity here, or on Barkovich here. And so I think it's part and parcel of the same thing he was doing as a boy, he's doing now here again.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, lashing out out of shame and fear and confusion. Yeah, it's great.
And I do like how King does this, right? Because like he didn't come right out and say this is like the last time he did this. He just kind of draws these lines, these dotted lines between these things, by bringing up the air rifle again, by reminding us of this act. And then I think there's a couple lines in here where Garrity says something like damn it, McVries, you like got into my head or something, and it just like
Mhm.
draws the line for you, and you'd be like, oh yeah, this is what Garrity does when he is made sexually uncomfortable. He lashes out like this.
Yeah. So, I will say I kind of thought that this was going to be part of Garrity's sort of slide into becoming evil,
Mhm.
but it's not nearly as pat as that. This
Mhm.
is more like what you just said, where this is a kind of a specific reaction to a specific stimulus that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from here, I think it's kind of, this is really sad, man. All the boys kind of like leap on Barkovich immediately because he, at one point he starts to cry, and they all just jump on him for this. And it's not that I don't think this asshole like deserves to be like admonished a little bit, but man, this feels bad, doesn't it? Like,
Yeah.
this feels bad.
Yeah, I don't think that we, the reader, are meant to feel any of this sense of justice that Garrity feels from this.
Yeah. I mean, like, Barkovich is doomed either way, right? Like, this is, anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things we talked about earlier is like, if you're going to enter something like this, like, shouldn't you play to win?
Mhm.
And if so, like, is it really that horribly immoral to sort of try to get other people to lose, since it's your life on the line? And we connected that to the idea that it's a metaphor for like, well, how do you want to live your life? Do you want to be that kind of person? And it's like, okay, I get it, but this is, but come on, cut the guy some slack,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about like, what is the difference, like, morally and ethically, between a person who behaves this way from mile one and the rest of the boys who get there eventually, right? Like, by the end of the story, they've kind of all agreed, fuck everyone else, stop, like, we're going to make an agreement that we're not going to help each other. Like, like, everyone kind of gets to that point eventually. And so, like, it's interesting how we draw like our lines of morality and say, well, Barkovich did it sooner, and so he's worse.
Yeah.
Ethically.
Which I agree that that's fascinating, because you could also say, well, maybe Barkovich's life has been harder, and so he's just already at that point in his life where he's and like, and he really is no different from them. He just reached the point earlier because he'd been beat up by life more. We don't really know that one way or the other, but it's possible.
Yeah, we don't really learn a lot about his life before all this. And I mean, really anyone, I mean, very limited amount of information we learn about any of the boys. I think, Garrity the most, obviously, McVries the second most, and then little bits and pieces of the other ones, but not a lot to form anything like this on.
Yeah.
All right. I really like this part, Matt, where Garrity talks about Olsen's hair right before he died. He says he noticed that it was going gray. This could, of course, be just described by the extreme stress that this whole situation is putting on the human body. But I think to Garrity, it speaks of kind of this loss of time, like this idea that the long walk itself isn't temporary, it's forever, it's eternal, it's lifelong. They haven't been on it for days, but for years, for lifetimes. And I think it supports the metaphor for like the walk as a metaphor for life thing we've been talking about. But I think it also is, in my opinion, kind of laying the seeds for this idea that we end the story on, which is that, despite winning, Garrity is just still walking, that they're just, this is forever now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that image, that metaphor. It's almost like a situation like this effectively distances you so much from the child that you were before this all started, that it effectively is as if decades have passed for you and now you're an old. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. So Garrity maps out the rest of their walk for him, saying they're going to go right down the main drag of a town called Lewiston. The main drag, by the way, is called the Cotter Memorial Avenue, named after the only kid from Maine who ever won the walk, at least until our boy Garrity. But this one died a week later, Matt.
This is just the kind of information that you really makes you excited to compete in the long walk. They don't say this, but I feel like that probably happens a lot, because of the horror. Yeah, for the obvious reasons.
One of the things that is intentionally and suspiciously missing from this entire story is information on the winners, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how many winners have we seen depicted in the story?
Yeah.
Well, we have the one that Stebbins tells the story of that, like, he wins the walk, and what does he do? He drops over to the other dead walker and like is sitting there talking to him, weeping. And we got this guy who we know has died. Like, we don't get like scenes or sequences of like, oh look, this winner, here's what he got, and here's living it up over here. Like, it's just this thing that's missing from the story, and I think it's because it's probably a thing that people don't really talk about very often in this world.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I to just hit upon the same drum again, it's like, yeah, go be a war hero, go, rah rah. And then when you look at the actual returning veterans from war, especially at the time that this book was originally conceived and written, especially the first draft of it, it's like, oh my God, this is like, these are broken men. Like, this is the prize. This is the prize for going off and being a hero. These are the heroes that they've been destroyed by their ordeal, and they got a medal out of it, and now their life is ruined.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's definitely true and was true when King was writing this story and is true now is that our country specifically, and I think the world in general, does not treat its veterans very great, right? These people come back from this incredible sacrifice, and there's a once upon a time story that Garrity is going to tell at the very end of this book that I think is saying kind of this exact thing. So we'll talk about that more when we get to it. But I'm really into this whole depiction of this thing, because it doesn't seem like we get to see the life the winners are living it up, and I think that's a very intentional omission from the story.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the like support our troops thing, where it's like, of course I want to support our troops, but like when people say that, they don't mean like financially or like that. They just mean like yeah, good, you go, man, great, good for you.
They literally just mean if they see someone in uniform in an airport, they'll say thank you for your service, and that's the full definition of support our troops.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So the chapter ends, Matt, with Barkovich. Well, he rips his own throat out and dies. So what's your thought on this?
I don't know how one would go about that exactly, but I guess that's kind of the point, is that it's just a pretty fucking horrifying image and idea. I think this book is actually the most horrifying King book that we read for the show, specifically in the sense of just making me go, damn, that's horrifying.
Fair.
And not because it's some kind of monster. It's because it's a kid ripping his throat out because his mind has been broken by a very, very not supernatural ordeal.
Yeah, and the way it's described, right, is that like he starts screaming, "Not yet," and then his voice just gets like higher and higher and more shrill, and then suddenly, without warning, he just rips his throat out, turns into a gurgling mess. He falls over, collapses, and they shoot him anyway.
Yeah,
still, because of course they will. It's, I mean, and Garrity has to feel some level of responsibility for it, right? I think it's exactly one of those things that I think McVries depicts this perfectly, which is like, this is the thing he'd been hoping for, begging for, wanting. I mean, one of the things that McVries kind of said is, I have to outwalk him. I know I'm not going to make it to the end, but I have to outlast Barkovich. And actually, like, that, in my opinion, that is kind of part of Garrity's motivation for fucking with him, right? Is that helping McVries keep his promise. Like, I'm going to try to knock this guy out psychologically so he can lose before McVries does. But like, just like there's no pleasure in this. Actually, there's like, this is the guy they all hated, and like, it's not like he's done, we did it. It's just horrible.
Yeah, exactly. It's all meaningless. There's no victories at any point in this whole book for anyone.
Yep.
Well, okay, there's maybe a couple, but even those are meaningless. Yeah, we'll talk about what one potential pseudo victory in a second, but it's like even that is clearly not meant to be perceived as a victory.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to chapter 15. This next chapter picks up the next morning, again jumping through time. I think King seems to specifically like be avoiding talking about the nights anymore,
Mhm.
perhaps because our characters are just kind of living through them in a half asleep haze now, and there's just not too much to do there. But like we focused on the first night in a lot of detail, and since then we've kind of been just carving the nights out of the story.
Yeah, I think you're right. And besides, we've got to have some way of sort of passing time without dragging through the dull periods where nothing's really happening outside of Garrity's head.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
that's
I
true.
think it's also helpful that like we see it's more stark that there's been a deterioration in Garrity's mental and physical state because we skip a little bit of time and then we're kind of reintroduced to his state and we're like, okay, things are clearly worse. We're watching a degradation, and the increment of that degradation is basically from morning to morning.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. Speaking of his degradation, I want to read this sentence here. His feet had headaches, terrible migraines. He could feel them swelling each time he put his weight on them. His buttocks hurt. His spine was icy fire. But his feet had headaches, and the blood was coagulating in them and swelling them and turning the veins into al dente spaghetti. Um, so like obviously like throughout this book I've been making marathon comparisons, but like we've long left my ability to make any kind of comparison to
Uh-huh.
what these kids are feeling now. But I love, because I think that's actually a challenge of this book. Like nobody reading this book, I shouldn't say nobody, 99.9% of people reading this book have never walked half as long as these kids are walking, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So like how do you describe what's going on with them physically in a way that a person could read this and be like, oh, I get that. And I think King does such a fabulous job of that here. Like his feet had headaches is a wonderful phrase. Like it's wonderful because like somehow I get that. I read that and I'm like, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, I think King has always had a knack for describing injuries in a way that just makes me writhe. Uh, Whereas I don't know that all authors do that. Like if you just kind of blandly describe some injury, then I'm just like, yeah, okay, it doesn't connect emotionally, but the
Mhm.
way King does it here absolutely does. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. In spite of all this, though, Matt, Garrity is excited. They're only 13 miles from Freeport, 13 miles from Jan and his mother, and only 26 walkers left. Only 6 of them are ones that we know. We have, Baker, Abraham, Collie Parker. We have Ray, of course, McVries, and our good friend Stebbins. The rest are red shirts or spear carriers, as McVries puts it. But those are kind of, the book kind of takes a step back and says, here are our players. These are the ones you know, and there's 20 other ones.
Yeah, I kind of enjoy that King lampshades the fact that he clearly picked in advance which characters are going to like matter and be interesting, and then he just ignored the remaining majority.
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes you get to like a just economics of storytelling, right? Where we just don't have time to characterize every single one of these kids. I do think it's interesting that like even up until the very, very end, there's still some kind of red shirts that we just don't really know. Like I think they're like when it's down to like 6, the book does this again, and it points out a couple characters that we've literally never heard of until that very moment that they're being described to us.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I kind of do like that because it's like to continue sort of all of the metaphors of like you go through your life and you may be sort of side by side with these people, but that doesn't mean you know them.
Mm-hmm.
You're always surrounded by people. You're always surrounded by strangers, even to
Yep.
the day you die.
Yeah. We also learn, Matt, that the Vegas odds are all on Stebbins right now, who we see looks as good as he did the day he started this whole thing. So the seeming machine that is Stebbins is carrying on, and Vegas has responded to it.
Yeah, well, good for him. We'll see if it works out.
So Garrity drops back to find Baker, but speaking of Stebbins, he ends up finding him instead. And before we get to their conversation, which I think is very, very important, we have to talk about this, because as he's dropping back, he's looking around, and we see this. Past a dead black government sales building with a large "May is confirm your sex month" sign in the window. Okay,
Uh-huh.
that's interesting, right?
Yeah, that's baffling is what that is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really because we've been talking about sex and sexuality and Garrity's kind of uncomfortable, traumatic relation to this whole thing. But we haven't actually seen much of society's viewpoint on this, right? Like, we don't know, like we talked a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago about racism, but we don't actually know, like, is this a racist society? Is this a sexist society? Is this a homophobic society? I think because it so closely mirrors ours, we can be like, yeah, I mean, probably, probably a little bit at least.
Yeah.
And then we get stuff like this, and it just makes you scratch your head, like, okay, what are we saying here, right? Are we saying that, like, oh, this society actually allows you to pick your sex, or is it actually saying this is a society in which you have to go to a government office and confirm what your sex is? Like, you need government authority, authorization, and confirmation for this kind of thing.
So my first gut reaction was kind of the first thing you said, which was like, oh, interesting. Like, maybe in very specific and unexpected ways, they have kind of a progressive stance, or what we would think of as a progressive stance, although it's probably being used as a method of control. And then I thought about it. I was like, well, if you read this in 1979, your thought would probably just be, oh, they're just turning the screws again on people by saying you have to confirm that you're a man.
Yeah,
like you have to go to the post office and do a little pointless bureaucratic ritual to confirm that you're a man. And it's like, you know what that means is that the state determines whether or not you're a man, which gives the state ultimate power over this incredibly important aspect of your identity.
Yeah, I don't have a feeling that, like, a trans person could walk up to this dead black government. By the way, calling it a government sales building, I think is fascinating. But I just don't see in this world a trans person walking up to this building and saying, I'm a woman, and them being just like, yeah, sure, okay, we're good with that. I see actually the exact opposite of them saying, sorry,
that's not what it says here.
We're going to need you to just confirm that that's not the case. Yeah. I definitely think that is the case here. But I think it does lead a little bit of, it gives us a little breadcrumbs about maybe why Garrity is the way he is because society is this way.
Yeah, I agree.
Speaking of Garrity and his fucked up sex life, Garrity and Stebbins hit a steep hill as they're walking, which is a familiar hill to Garrity because a girl he dated used to live here, and he thinks to himself, once he had dated a girl who lived on Brickyard Hill, a girl named Carolyn. She was married now, had a kid. She might have let him, but he was young and pretty dumb. So, like, oh yeah, that's a girl. She lives here. She's married with a kid. I could have probably had sex with her, but I was dumb and I didn't really try.
Yeah.
Also, like, again, presumably she's a little bit older than he is, but, like, married and has a kid now. Like, Garrity's 16, right? That's kind of wild.
Yeah, that seems to be the kind of society that we're in. I mean, it seemed that my recollection of McVries' whole story was basically like him and his girl got they got a pretty early start on life, so that just kind of seems to be the world that this is.
And maybe we're also coming at this from a 2023 perspective, where people got married much younger back then. I don't think 16 much younger, but people just were married and having kids much younger a few decades ago. It's
of course, once again we're hitting the speed of Garrity, like, ruminating obsessively on sexuality, women, etc.
Yeah, I mean, he thinks about her boobs, right, at some point, not long after this.
Yeah. It just connects to all this roiling confusion and uncertainty and and dread that I think young men feel surrounding sexuality. Like, I was thinking about this and how Garrity is actually obsessed with the idea that, or with the fact that he's a virgin. And I remember, like, being a young man and having a similar, very ironically, being a virgin is like a kind of scarlet letter in young man society anyway, where it's like, it's like, oh, you haven't had sex yet? What are you, gay? It's stupid. Like, it's incredibly stupid. Like you're expected to be this sexually masterful being from the age of, like, 13, which is absurd. But that's how it kind of felt as a teenager. to me. And I think that's kind of how Garrity is Garrity's existence has been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, this we'll see here in just a second. This is one of the things that Stebbins attacks him about, because he knows, because Garrity is pretty open about this whole thing.
Yeah.
So let's get to that conversation. So Stebbins and Garrity start talking, and Stebbins immediately starts to apply some clear psyop against his walking competitor. First, he says, that his mom and his girl won't actually be able to get to the front of the line to see him. It'll be too crowded. They won't be able to push their way to the front in time, and they're not going to be there. So he's not going to see him. Then he says, but it's really just your mom you want to see, not your girl, right? Which Garrity has a very, very violent reaction to. And then he says this: virgin, aren't you? Maybe a little bit queer in the bargain? Touch of the lavender? Don't be afraid. You can talk to Papa Stebbins. And this is like actually the genius of Stebbins, right? Like he's seen, he's observed, he's been listening the whole time, and he knows that this whole thing is a trigger point for Ray, and he attacks him with it. And it almost works, right? We see Ray almost lose control, almost just attack him. So I think, to go back to this, Matt, I mean, we've kind of already talked about this, but any additional information on like, why is this such a trigger point for Garrity? What is it about, virginity, sexuality? Like, is this just society? Is this just a reflection of the world?
I mean, I think we've got enough evidence that he has, the trauma surrounding the incident with when he was a kid. There's a lot of fear in his upbringing with his dad getting squatted and everything. And so he has this feeling that he needs to be very, very unimpeachably normal. And I mean, I think this is like the crux of his character. Like, for stepping back from you're writing a novel, you want to construct your protagonist, you want to construct his character and his character traits. Garrity's character trait, as I think I said a while ago, is that he's the perfect product of his society. He's been traumatized and terrorized into being like exactly normal by the specifications of the society. But he became like twisted and obsessed about particularly being sexually normal, but he's also just kind of normal in every way. And like, yeah. So, yeah, that's what I think.
No, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's just, once again, Stebbins really knows his shit, right? Like this gets really close to working. Yeah.
He also, I think he also pokes his button about being kind of a little touch of the Oedipal complex. Maybe he's not gay, but he may have a little bit of Roland syndrome, which I think he's very sensitive about as well.
Which kind of like, I mean, jumping ahead a little bit, but like Ray kind of blows off his mom in the interaction. Like he makes his entire focus on Jan, and he acknowledges this later too. And it's like, that's probably part of what Stebbins did to him there, right? Is he put this thing into his head. And so maybe even subconsciously, he just made it all about Jan. And I have to, because my precious masculinity, I have to show that the most important thing in this world is my woman, that I need to show that.
Right. Even though I think in that circumstance, it would be very understandable if a person would be wanting comfort from their mom, right?
Yeah, I don't want my mommy, for sure.
Yeah.
So Garrity leaves Stebbins behind in a rage, and eventually does find Baker, who he's looking for in the first place. He loses his shoes in the process, by the way. He's now walking barefoot, completely barefoot on the road now. So here we are, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we knew that would happen just based on what we've heard about previous walks, but this certainly seems like a symbol of further deterioration. Like it seems like a kind of meaningful demarcation point in the journey, not just a physical, but also a spiritual degradation.
Yeah. I wonder how different walks would be 50 years later, because our shoe technology has gotten a lot better since King wrote this book.
Yeah, they probably have those like recurve spring bouncy shoes. That would be cool.
And I just feel like they would last longer too. Like just like in general, the wear and tear. Like obviously, I think they would still, like, no shoe is made to be walked on that much consecutively. But Like I just feel like they would just last a lot longer.
Sure. I mean, you could make him out of Kevlar or something. You could get Massachusetts in most of the long walks instead of just every once in a while. That'd be great. Amazing.
Great. I'm glad. Thanks, technology.
Yeah.
So Matt Baker says he doesn't look great. He says he's about done in. And we see in this moment he's looking back on his life and he's kind of ticking off the nice things that have happened to him. And he says this in his mind, it's like he's getting old and senile. And I think once again, more imagery of the walk as something that has taken place over years and decades rather than just days. And as I said earlier, further supporting the metaphors of the walk as being life, like we've been talking about. Like they're reaching the end of their lives here and they're thinking back on the good times.
Yep, absolutely.
He also asked Garrity a question. He says, "Why did we do it, Garrity? We must have been insane." And Garrity's response here is, "I don't think there was any good reason." And this, Matt, now that we've reached the end of the book, we can say this kind of ends up being the book's conclusion of the mystery that is, why did Garrity sign up for this whole thing? Mm-hmm. Is that, there really wasn't any good reason. What are your thoughts on the book's kind of declarative non-answer here?
I mean, I think number one, King seems really committed to leaving us unsatisfied in an overall sense. There's no answer to the mystery. There's no cathartic reveal tying into Garrity's past. There's just no good reason. And then I think the other part of it is to say, how could there have been an adequate reason? What would an adequate good reason for this even look like? What could it possibly be? What answer could possibly be satisfying? And the answer is nothing. There is almost like logically no possible good reason to do this. And that's what they realize.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot. So they're getting closer and closer to Freeport now, and a boy named Klingerman, who thinks he has an appendicitis, starts just screaming. But interestingly enough, like he screams all through Freeport, but that kind of becomes another noise, another backdrop to Garrity's world, because he hardly notices it. He starts walking faster and faster towards Jan. McVries tries to slow him down, but Ray won't hear it. God, we get this sentence here, Matt. He says, "Don't you want to see her? Of course I want to see her. What the hell do you think No. Yes. I don't know. I had a friend once, and he and I, we took off our clothes, and she like, this is perfect, right? He's not rational anymore, right? He's kind of losing it. And so he's doing this kind of stream of consciousness connection of things and events. And it's just, how do you represent the depth of someone's confusion around all these conflicting emotions around all this stuff? Just perfectly done there. Yeah. Perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. It's this amazingly poignant expression of all this frustration and confusion, and it's also central to his mindset. I really, this text here and kind of everything else to the end is just this incredibly intense, gut-wrenchingly emotional progression of story beats.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think it's the thing, like, I remember the first time I read this book and like not really expecting a lot out of it. And like, I was really into the concept and I was really into the characters and I was enjoying it. And then you approach the ending here and it's just like, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit.
Yeah.
You just couldn't believe just the emotional toll this thing was taking on you. This book like knocked me out of my chair, and like it is really remarkable. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll put it this way. I think I'm more invested in the Pete McVries, Raymond Garrity kind of friendship relationship than I've been in probably most of the books we've covered. And that's not to say that I haven't been invested in the books we covered. This is just like, this really got to me. And I was like, as we're getting toward the end, you're like, look, I know one of these guys is going to die.
Yeah.
Probably not both, but definitely one of them. Probably it's going to be McVries, because I think I see where this is going. And you're like, shit, I don't want McVries to die, but I also don't want Garrity to die. And it's like you care, right? You're like thinking about it as if it's a thing that you have any say over, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so I just thought it was interesting that it was kind of living inside my head in that way.
No, I love that. I do. And I agree with you. And I think, once again, it's remarkable. This was a story originally written when King was in college. And, I know like we have to say that very likely that this was edited, pretty extensively prior to being published. He didn't just pick up the story he wrote sophomore year and just said, "Yep, we're good." But even so, like the core of this, the meat of this, had to have been there from the beginning, and it's just a remarkable accomplishment from such a young writer.
For sure.
So we get to the scene we've been waiting for a very long time, and as you already talked about, King kind of masterfully swells the tension here. You can almost hear the noises of the crowd, the screaming of Klingerman, his feet slapping on the pavement as he walks faster and faster, and then like everything breaks as he sees Jan. He runs towards her, he grabs her hand, he also grabs his mother's hand. And we see here he's about to quit. He's done. He's just gonna stand here until they kill him. But our boy Pete McVries once again saves the day. He pulls Garrity away both physically and mentally from the two of them, saves his life, also saves them from having to witness their loved one murdered right in front of them. It's just a remarkably effective scene, right? Like I think we had a lot of speculation going into it. Like, what is this going to look like? Is he even going to see him? Are they even going to be there? What is it going to look like? And this version of it, I think, is just remarkable.
Yeah, this really delivered. I mean, I said a minute ago, this book doesn't give you any satisfaction or any catharsis, but this was a moment we've been looking forward to, and it wasn't just like, oh yeah, they weren't there. It was like, no, it was great. It was like he saw them, he runs up to them, dramatically grabs their hands. It's incredibly emotional, and I love the moment where it's like their faces begin to transform from like happiness to see him to like dawning horror, realizing that like he's not moving on, and just incredibly intense. I just loved it so much.
Yeah, I love this as well. Of course I must go on, he thought dully. I am Maine's own. And in that second he hated her. Although if he had done anything, it was no more than catch her and his mother in the snare he had laid for himself. Mm-hmm. I love that. Like the honesty of these emotions are so great, right? Like that, like the honesty of like, I hate you. I hate like, I hate that like you almost caused me to lose this whole thing, but really it's all my fault. It's always been all my fault. Like he can simultaneously feel this hatred and as well as acknowledge that hatred is bullshit, that it's coming from his own responsibilities, his own choices.
Yeah, Garrity does get a bit more self-awareness before he, totally disintegrates, which is good, which is
definitely. All right. So we move on to chapter 16. And I know we talked at the beginning of the story that we weren't going to talk much about the quotes that start every single chapter. But I do think the quotes like from here on out become like especially interesting. This one that begins this chapter is from the Muhammad Ali Sonny Liston fight, their second fight between the two of them. It's actually those of you that don't know much about boxing, it's one of the most controversial fights in the history of boxing, for many reasons. Like Muhammad Ali had a jab that knocked Liston down that like was so fast that people didn't see it, and so a lot of people just thought Liston fell down for no reason. And then like the refs weren't doing the count right. Like normally like they're slamming on the mat, and so other refs didn't hear the count going off, and Liston got back up and one of the refs let him go, and then the other guy was like, no, I counted him out, the fight's over. And so they were like standing up about to start fighting again when someone else says no, it's over, like in the middle of a round. It's just like this whole mess of controversy that like brought into question the legitimacy of everything that happened here. What do you think, King choosing to reference this fight, a quote from this fight, has to say about the predicament of our walkers?
Well, I mean, that last bit where you pointed out, like they're still fighting even though the fight's already over, is this idea that our heroes, right, are staggering on, punch drunk and barely conscious, regardless of the fact that the fight is already over. They're dead men walking. In a sense, all of them are, even Garrity, because it's debatable whether he really survives this, right? But yet they go on regardless.
Yeah. No, I like that. I think you're right. I absolutely think you're right. Yeah. Just the idea that it's also turned into a boxing match, like that's we're putting the competitors against each other now. Like this is
Yeah, absolutely. That's one main thing that changes here is all the camaraderie kind of evaporates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So chapter 16 begins with a walker named Tubbins going insane. And true to our motif in this book, he's once again talking about sex in some way. He is screaming about the whore of Babylon, saying, "The whore of Babylon comes among us. She lies in the streets and spreads her legs on the filth of the cobblestones." This is, of course, a reference to the Book of Revelation and the arrival of the whore of Babylon, a character in the Book of Revelation. So, okay, let's put this caveat here once again. Every time we talk about Bible stuff, Matt, I am not a biblical scholar. You are not a biblical scholar. We are not experts of any of this thing. But there's obviously a lot of charged imagery here, right? And we have to look at it. I mean, first, just generally the idea that this kid is quoting Revelation is indicative of the end of time, right? His time specifically, but perhaps all time.
Yeah. Also, it's an indication that people have been obsessed with, connecting sexuality to destruction kind of, forever.
Yeah.
It's a very, very old association. Invoking the whore of Babylon in this context reminds you of like, this is our nature.
No, for sure. Second, it's important to note that the whore of Babylon isn't actually a woman. Okay, well, it is, but it's also like textually within the Bible a metaphor as well. Like the whore is seen riding upon a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. The Bible specifically tells us the heads represent 7 mountains with 7 kings on them. The 10 horns represent 10 kings without kingdoms, and the whore herself represents the, quote, great city which reigns over all the kings of the earth. So what does this mean? Nobody knows, man. Nobody knows. Like, you can look this stuff up and there's like 17 different interpretations of what this all means. Like, Rome has 7 hills around it, so maybe they're not talking about Babylon. Maybe they were just talking about Rome. I don't know, man.
I started trying to make a locked tomb analogy, but there's neither 7 nor 10 rocky planets for this to be associated with, so it doesn't really work. Never mind.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at actual interpretations of this thing, like literally every sect of Christianity like uses this as a definitionally like what is wrong with the sect of Christianity they're breaking away from. Like the whore of Babylon from the original like separatists of Catholicism was like, oh, the whore of Babylon, it represents the church and the corruption of the church itself. And so we're breaking away from it. I think the the Latter-day Saints do the same thing. The Seventh-day Adventists do the same thing. Like it's most commonly used as indicative of flaws in the church as a whole and how our new sect of the church is going to return us to our righteous ways. But I think, what it means literally, I don't think is important here. I think in this story, I think its use here is actually pretty simple, right? We're reinforcing the narrative's preoccupation with sex by bringing this imagery in here. We're kind of representing the corruption of the city that the whore of Babylon represents, or state, or church, or governing body, we could say, as it being like inherently immoral. And then also, this guy's he just went insane, man. He's just crazy.
Yeah. Sounds good to me. Yeah. No, I like the idea that he's talking about the corruption of the state that they live in. But also he's just gone insane too. Yeah.
All right, so we've reached the end game, Matt, and Garrity finds that for the first time he actually wants to win. Though he has a feeling that he won't, actually. It's a little surprising, right? That this is the first time he's like, yeah, I kind of want to win this thing. Yeah,
it's our fascinating character who really lacks reflection and lacks long-term thinking and just kind of does things is finally beginning to think that he actually wants something, that he's thinking beyond the moment.
Yeah. So the chapter kind of opens with Abraham approaching Garrity. Abraham, who we see has removed his jacket and his shirt and is just kind of, bare chested and emaciated, is here to ask Garrity a favor or make him promise to something. And the promise is no help for anybody. Do it on your own or don't do it. And so here we are, Matt. At the end, we've got 20 walkers left to go, and all ideas of companionship and togetherness are gone. We see that Garrity agrees to this, and so does everyone else. Even OG Musketeer Pete McVries agrees to this whole thing. And so any idea of fellowship or companionship or team is dead, is broken.
Yeah. I mean, I said before that Garrity kind of broke with Barkovich and kind of went after him. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of the whole band, the whole quartet, if you will, breaking, agreeing to destroy everything good that they had scrapped together, all of the good humanity that they had discovered, even in this terrible situation. No, we're going to throw all that away because it's just making things worse. Actually, I mean, that is really what they're doing. It's saying all the things that are good about us, that are worth, keeping alive, we're going to throw those away because they're making our lives harder, and they're standing between us and survival. So every man for himself. I still kind of feel, I still kind of feel like there's that optimism about the kernel of human nature, right? The kernel of goodness. Mm-hmm. But like this is the bit where he's saying like, but watch, they throw that away willingly.
Yeah. And we will see the consequences of that pretty directly here pretty soon. But to the desire for optimism, there is still a moment at the very end of the story where Garrity, despite agreeing to this whole thing, says, fuck it, no, I'm going to try to help my friend. And he fails to, but it's not for lack of trying. So even at the very, very, very end, Garrity holds on to this idea of musketeerism, of fellowship, of companionship, of brotherly, whatever. So it still exists despite their best attempts to carve it out of themselves.
Yeah. So it is an optimistic story, is what you're saying.
There you go. I really love Garrity's reaction to making this promise, though. He says, "Now I'm an animal, nothing but a dirty, tired, stupid animal. You did it. You sold out." And I love this, Matt, from a structural, like technical standpoint. This isn't a quote. This is not Garrity saying that sentence out loud. This is just Garrity thinking. But it is structured like he's saying it. And it's really interesting because this is not a first-person perspective book. This is third-person. We do get to see in the heads, it's third-person omniscient, limited. We don't see in all characters' heads. But like this is not structured as if the narrator is relaying this to us, what Garrity is thinking of. This is direct. This is Garrity kind of directly talking to himself. And I think it's the first time in the book it's happened. I think there is one more time I caught it at the end of the book where he just says I, and we see in just the narrative text, it says I. I think it's a really interesting choice here. It kind of draws attention to it.
Yeah. And I maybe also is a sign of the sort of mental deterioration of the character as like these lines are blurring and it makes the text feel kind of the way Garrity's mind feels, which is that borders are breaking down, walls are breaking down, and reality and unreality are becoming mixed.
Yeah, no, I agree. So from this point on, people really stop talking to each other. As we said, it's no longer a team sport, it's a boxing match, and they're all just kind of waiting for everyone else to throw in the towel. And we get this part here. It was growing very cold. Garrity began to wonder if there was ever really, if there really was such a thing as the sun, or if he had dreamed it. Even Jan was a dream to him now, a summer dream of a summer that never was. Yet he seemed to see his father even more clearly. His father with the heavy shock of hair he himself had inherited, and the big, meaty truck driver's shoulders. His father had been built like a fullback. He could remember his father picking him up, swinging him dizzily, rumpling his hair, kissing him, loving him. So I think that's the last Garrity thinks of his father in the story.
Yeah, and I think this is the closest we're going to get to that catharsis, right? Where it's just like,
Yeah.
hey, your dad actually loved you, and
Mhm.
you acknowledge that fact, despite the fact that you've sort of been distancing yourself from him,
Yeah.
and just avoiding thinking about how painful this loss is up until this point.
Yeah, you're right that like Garrity never comes fully out and says that like losing his father actually broke him and hurt him and probably led to him doing this, right?
Yeah.
He never actually comes out and says it, but this is the closest he gets to it, that he admits that like his dad did love him and he loved his father and his father was important to him. Everything else fades away. Jan fades away. The sun fades away, but the one constant in his head here at the end is his father. And for the first time in his life, he's seeing his father and acknowledging the great meaning this man had in his life.
I said before that he'd forgotten the face of his father, and not to pat myself on the back too much, but he basically had, and this in this moment he finally remembers the face of his father. He literally, kind of metaphorically, not literally, but metaphorically looks in the face the memories of his father and who this man really was, and not just the sort of story he told himself about like, oh, my father, he couldn't keep his mouth shut and he drank too much and he was, he failed us. He was the one who failed us. So it's like, no, your father loved you. Your father was a good father, and the state killed him, and
or whatever. We never actually learn what squatting is.
You get squatted, and you're allowed to be brokenhearted about this.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's sad, but also like the book throws us a little bit of a bone here.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It really is that catharsis that we wanted. It just so happens that it's like 2 paragraphs. And then it's over.
So the next thing Garrity knows, Collie Parker has shot a soldier dead and is on top of the half track, begging his compatriots to join him. But unfortunately, Matt, they keep their promise. Nobody moves, nobody helps, and Collie Parker is shot in the back and killed. What was your reaction to this one?
Well, if you see it written down on paper, it sounds really badass. But I don't think at that moment I felt anything like that. I don't think I felt like, oh, fuck yeah. I think I was just like, and then he's dead, and that was pointless. And there's no victories here. There's not even like a token sort of symbolic victory. It's not even the right soldier, right? It's not even the soldier who almost shot Garrity. It's just some other guy.
Yeah.
So like we can't,
and they just replace him so immediately, right?
Yeah.
There's just a new person on top of the half track 5 minutes later.
So there's just nothing good to feel about this, really.
Yeah, but the book does kind of introduce this idea to us. Like McVries' reaction to this is really interesting, because he's like, he wanted us to help him, and we could have, and maybe we could have done something. And ultimately, I think, no, you couldn't have, right? But like, to McVries, this is an idea of we've damned ourselves. Is like we made this agreement and we held it and watched our friend die because of it. And so like maybe even like we're all going to die. Maybe even it would have been a more honorable death to stand on, to quote Les Mis, to stand on top of the barricade and die for the thing you believe in versus just walking and getting shot down. Like I don't know,
Yeah.
But it clearly like breaks something in McVries, I think.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of a conversation we had, I don't know, last week, recently, where it was like the idea of the meaning of a gesture, even if you kind of know the gesture is doomed and you know that it is just a gesture. It's like, well, even if it's doomed, even if you're going to die and everyone involved in the gesture is going to die, maybe other people will see it and the story of it will go on. And is it really meaningless then? I don't know. I don't have an answer, but it reminds me of that conversation.
Yeah, and that doesn't get to happen here. Like, can you do kind of imagine, like, what would the societal impact be if, let's say, the 20 boys remaining overpowered every single soldier on that half track, right?
Yeah.
And, like, obviously their death is still guaranteed. Like, they're just going to send a whole fucking unit of soldiers out and they'll kill them all.
Right.
But just imagine, like, the image of we've taken over the half track, right? Like we're all collectively standing on top of this thing in resistance to what the walk is.
Yeah.
And what that might have done or could have done. Like that's actually one of those things that like in a more traditional version of the story you would maybe see, right? That like we give ourselves some method of like, yes, our characters all died, yes, everyone lost, but at least there's like a kernel of hope of change or altering of the system. This book does not give you any of that. There's none. And we see that perhaps that could have been there if they had just not agreed to turn their backs on each other.
Yeah, you're totally right.
So as night settles in once again and the remaining walkers struggle on, we see only 4 musketeers are left now, 5 if we count Stebbins, but we don't have to count him. Abraham is cold and going fast. Baker is counting the change in his pockets and planning for his lead-lined coffin. And Garrity's kind of daydreaming again. I wanted to read this to you, Matt. Garrity wondered how it would be to lie in the biggest, dustiest library silence of all, dreaming endless, thoughtless dreams behind gummed-down eyelids, dressed forever in your Sunday suit. No worries about money, success, fear, joy, pain, sorrow, sex, or love. Absolute zero. No father, mother, girlfriend, lover. The dead are orphans. No company but the silence like a moth's wing. An end to the agony of movement, to the long nightmare of going down the road. The body in peace, stillness, and order. The perfect darkness of death.
Incredible.
Yeah. What writing? What
so
writing?
Much, yeah, so much amazing stuff like that, especially toward the end of this book. But it's just soaring. I love it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the thing I love about it, I'm trying to think of the way to phrase this. Like, this is beautifully, poetic prose from Stephen King, but it also feels true to Garrity as a character, right? Like, it's not like suddenly we're having these characters like wax philosophically about the world, which is really just an outlet for the author to share their viewpoint. Like, it is that, of course, but it still feels in character. It feels like this is something that Raymond Garrity would be thinking. This is something that would be happening internally in Garrity at this moment in the story. And I think that can be hard sometimes, like you as a writer want to write these incredibly beautiful, flowery, wonderful turns of phrase, but you need to keep it true to what the characters would do and think. And that King is able to create characters that are like, blue collar, down to earth, like relatable to most people, and also has them think and act and ponder in these kind of purple ways. I don't know. I think it's remarkable, actually.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think he just establishes a pattern where he's expressing these thoughts and feelings that, a 16-year-old Raymond Garrity probably doesn't think no company but the silence, like a moth's wing.
Mm-hmm.
But he feels that.
Yeah.
He feels that ineffable feeling. And then Stephen King, the writer, nails it down with language. And you understand that's kind of the deal. Like, that's the bargain you're making with the storyteller, is he's like, I'm conveying to you the essence of what is happening in this person's head, not the words they're thinking, because they may not be thinking words, but the essence of it converted into words by me, the writer. And once he establishes that pattern, you just buy it. You just buy into it, and you're good.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think it's never in a distracting way. Like, you never like, I don't think that child would be thinking that, It's just, I agree with you. It's a bargain you make with the author, and he does it masterfully.
Yeah.
So one thing I noticed while reading this chapter actually is how the language that is used when people are killed has shifted a bit. For 2 walkers in a row, Garrity describes them as hold, or getting their whole. There's no more friendly euphemisms like getting your ticket anymore. It's just hold, which is so abrupt and empty.
Yeah, it's empty of any feeling or empathy. Yeah. I think the prose in general has become empty. I mean, I don't want to say that too forcefully, because that paragraph you just read was very full of imagery and feeling, but it was all sort of a feeling of meaninglessness and coldness. And so I do think that's the pervasive tone here.
Sure. I agree. All right. We will say just before our chapter ends, we get this little bit of more information. As they're walking across the New Hampshire border, they're seeing fireworks in the shape of the general's face. And then this was followed by the face of the New Hampshire provost governor, a man known for having stormed the German nuclear base in Santiago nearly single-handedly back in 1953. He had lost a leg to radiation poisoning. Why is there a German nuclear base in Chile in 1953?
Yeah. Great question, Scott. I mean, this is the most overtly sort of alt history thing that we've seen in the story, where it's like, okay. World War II ended differently. I get it. we've got a German nuclear base in Chile in 1953. That shouldn't be there. That doesn't make any sense. Why Germany nuclear 53? All these things. Okay. But and isn't there something else about something Germany related somewhere in the story that I've now blanked on? But
possibly I don't remember it.
Anyway, it's funny because it's like you have a puzzle, and it's like a 1,000-piece puzzle, and you have like 6 pieces, and they're all in the correct places. They're all where they're supposed to be, but you don't have the rest of the pieces. So you're like, well, all right, I can't really tell what this is supposed to be honest, but those sure are some interesting individual pieces anyway.
I agree. So the chapter comes to a close as they walk out of Maine and into New Hampshire, and at dawn, the text tells us the last day of the walk came up wet and overcast. So we kind of know here, Matt, we're here now. This is it. This is the end. We're getting there. And just as the chapter ends, Abraham, one of our musketeers, finally gets hold himself, dies.
Yep, rather unceremoniously, I think.
Yep, I think he just falls over. With his heavy shoes still on.
Yep.
All right, so we move on to part 3. We've been in part 2 for so long, we might have forgotten that there were 3 different parts to this book. But part 3 is titled "The Rabbit." This is where the last 2 chapters will take place, and they're pretty short chapters. I think it's really at this point only like 15 or so pages to the end of the book. But let's get into it. All right, so chapter 17, this is also another chapter that starts with a very interesting quote, Matt. This one starts with a quote from the Reverend Jim Jones, quote, "At the moment of his apostasy," he's saying, "Mother, mother, mother, mother." It's fun to think, Matt, we started this book with quotes from game shows, and now we're here with the man responsible for the Jonestown Massacre. 900 people died. And here we have Jim Jones calling out for his mother at the moment of his apostasy. So what do you think here, Matt?
I mean, I guess the question on my mind is, whose apostasy is it? Is it Garrity's apostasy? Is it Stebbins' apostasy? I don't. Am I taking that too literally?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe. But yeah, I mean, I like it as Garrity, and the idea of, we called him like kind of the perfect little citizen at the beginning of the story, right? And I think by the end of the story, we will see that that's really not the case anymore. I also like it as Stebbins, as he's kind of, all the reveal we learn in this chapter specifically about who Stebbins is and why he's here would perhaps fit in that, especially calling out for a parent in that moment. I don't know, but I really charged imagery there. Anytime you're quoting Jim Jones, you're bringing a lot of very specific vibes to your story.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I like Stebbins is in his sort of break with the Major. I also saw that as a kind of apostasy as well.
So it's the morning of our final day. There are only 9 walkers left at this point, including Stebbins, McVries, Baker, and of course our boy Garrity. It seems like we say here, Matt, that the walk is going to make it into Massachusetts. The first walk to do so in 17 years, which also shows us, I don't know if we had a definitive date that the walk's been going on for at least that long, which is kind of crazy. But that realization, I think, reminds me of the excitement the boys showed early on about, we're going to make it. It's going to be the longest ever a full company of walkers has made it on the walk, and like the pride they took in that fact. The feeling we get from this in this moment is, who fucking cares if we make it to Massachusetts? I don't give a shit.
It's just a nightmare now. It's like the
Yeah.
idea of this lasting a moment longer is just pure hell, and it's yeah, totally. There's no sense of accomplishment or anything. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So the boys are all in bad shape, except for Stebbins, of course, who is munching on some peanut butter crackers like he's feeling totally fine. Everyone else is having trouble eating anymore, but Stebbins is still munching away. But Matt, his body betrays him, and he pukes up the whole lot of crackers, kind of exposing his weakness a little bit here. It's really great little bit of storytelling, I think.
It's really wonderful because I think a lesser writer, they want to show that with Stebbins, it's all been a front the whole time, but they show it via, I don't know, pure dialogue or just having Stebbins sort of break down. But like, ultimately, as you just said, it's only his body that betrays him. It's only his body that breaks. His mind doesn't break. That's the great thing about Stebbins as a character, is his mind has actually been this perfect machine the whole time. He's sort of right, actually. But his body, he can't do it. It's impossible. It's just an impossible ask.
Yeah. And so in this moment of weakness, they kind of exploit it to ask Stebbins why he's here, and he's feeling vulnerable. So he answers them. He tells them he's the rabbit on a dog track that keeps the dogs running forward. The mechanical rabbit, which is what Stebbins originally thought he was, one that can never be caught and never tires. But of course, he's wrong. He's just as human as the rest of them. What do you think about the rabbit? This is our part 3 titular moment.
Well, one thing interesting about the rabbit is that the rabbit does not, the rabbit leads the dogs, whereas Stebbins has always held up the rear. So that's, in our kind of artistic sense, it's like, well, yeah, he was the inverse rabbit. He thought he was the rabbit, but if he were the rabbit, he would have stayed ahead. So he was actually, he should have realized that. He should have realized he wasn't really the rabbit. Another thing about the rabbit, of course, is that the rabbit cannot win the greyhound race. The rabbit is just part of the machine. Only the dogs can win. And so you could say that, hey, maybe in a sense, Stebbins is the rabbit because he's, number one, he can't win the race. Number two, he's part of the machine because the major sort of made him, in at least one sense. And so he is the rabbit, but that doesn't mean that he's going to win. Obviously. Yeah.
And this is when we get that big reveal, Matt. This is the one final big reveal the book had for us. We learned that Stebbins is a bastard son of the Major. He signed up for the walk in order to win and force his father to recognize him. His prize, if he wins, would be being taken to the Major's house. I like that that's all he says, right? Taken to his house. The presumption there is that like he would become his son, right? And he would be his acknowledged son.
Yeah.
Stebbins realizes, unfortunately, though, that the Major knew about this all along and used it to turn him into the rabbit. I think this is really interesting because we don't get to know like how Stebbins figured that out. Like it's just like he's been quietly like pondering to himself the entire time, realizing what's been going on, and then is like, oh fuck, I've been used actually.
Yeah, it would be interesting if there was some particular moment that gave him an insight. Maybe one of the times that he seemed rattled by the behavior of another walker. But I can't piece it together in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that this is my favorite "I am your father" moment in all of literature, but it really does, retroactively explain a lot of stuff that happened in the story, and I think it also makes it clearer and more interesting what we're doing with Stebbins as a character.
Yeah, I think a fun exercise for you would be to look back in the book and how many times the book kind of very explicitly tied Stebbins and the Major together. Like, I mean, like there were multiple times in the story where like, Garrity is like looking at the or thinking about the Major in his mind's eye, and he's like, why is Stebbins there? I think there was one time where I called it out to you specifically, and I was a little bit worried I made it too explicit and you were going to like guess where the story was going with that. But there's like a lot of beats in which Stebbins and the Major are tied together very, very specifically.
No, never occurred to me. I think the only way that it might have even possibly occurred to me would have been if the text had suggested that the Major had a lot of bastards lying around. Then I might have thought, oh, maybe one of our characters is one of his illegitimate children. But no, the text didn't establish that before this.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it is really fascinating to look at this character who, you know, he seemed so sure of everything, right? He knew the walk, he knew the rules, he knew the strategies, and and I'm not saying he didn't, but it's all predicated on an idea that he was totally fucking wrong about. That like, if he somehow wins this thing, his father is going to acknowledge him. Like, no fucking way. Yeah. Like, no way. Absolutely not.
Yeah. It's like he has unreasonable faith in the fairness of the system, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So at the Massachusetts line, the number is down to 7 walkers, and we get this. A very short while ago, just after Stebbins had made his confession, Garrity had experienced an odd, light lifting of his entire being. His feet seemed to remember what they had once been. There was a kind of frozen cessation to the blinding pains in his back and neck. It was like climbing up a final sheer rock face and coming out on the peak, out on the shifting mist of clouds and onto the cold sunshine and the bracing, undernourished air, with no place to go but down, and at a flying speed. Okay, so Garrity suddenly gets a 12th wind. But why, Matt? Why is this happening now for him?
I don't have a good answer. I mean, partly maybe he knows it's over soon, one way or the other. Partly maybe his body and mind have sort of become dissociated, and this is actually not a good thing. This is more like a dissociative episode. But I don't know. Do you have a more meaningful thought there?
No, I mean, I think it is exactly what you said. I think the idea of Stebbins becoming human provides him with hope in a lot of ways. Like, oh, this guy's not a machine. He's not the mechanical rabbit pushing us ahead. He's a human being that is on his last leg too.
Yeah. And I mean, I think Stebbins was this giant, totemic thing in his mind, this inhuman Terminator who was following, and he hated Stebbins, and he had this like irrational negative predisposition towards Stebbins. And now it's like, the mystery is resolved. Stebbins is just a man. And now it's almost fait accompli that I'm going to win. He doesn't quite think that, but I think maybe he feels that.
Yeah. Speaking of Stebbins, I really loved this moment, Matt. So one of the remaining walkers, George Fielder, is looking around, kind of zoned out, sees the crowd surrounding them. I think there's a place like a valley coming up where the crowd seemingly like possibly overflow the road. And he says, "They're going to eat us up," he muttered. "They're going to fall in on us and eat us up." "I think not," Stebbins said shortly. "There has never been a... They're going to eat us up, eat us up, eat us up, up, eat us up, eat us up." I love this, Matt, because like you can kind of see here that Stebbins is trying to resume the role of the knowledgeable, in control walker, of like, he's the guy that knows everything. He's the guy that knows how it works. He knows all the stats. He knows, like, he has all the answers to all the questions. And he's like, "I think not. There's never been a..." And it doesn't work anymore because like they've passed the point of rationality. And nobody cares what Stebbins has to say about the rules, or that's never happened before. Nobody cares. The guy George Fielder certainly doesn't care. He's losing his mind. It doesn't, like, his role or his strength in the walk has deteriorated.
Yeah, totally. It's almost comical, although I don't think in the moment I was laughing that he begins like, "I think not," which is not a way that any 16-year-old talks. And then he's interrupted by Taz, the Tasmanian Devil, barely coherent, actually not coherent. So it's interesting. It's interesting because like not only have the walkers now lost their minds, but I think maybe this is a stretch, but I feel like the walkers who have survived the longest are the ones who are kind of already cracked. Like Stebbins is a very unusual cat. Garrity we have now come to understand is a man shaped by trauma. McVries hated himself so much that he literally walked as long as he did because he hated himself and wanted to punish himself as much as possible.
Yeah.
And dying earlier in the walk would have been letting himself off the hook. So like these three at least they were already cracked before they came, and it just took a while for us to see that.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's also this line here that I wanted to read to you. It seemed that he had once been loved, once had himself had loved, but now it was just jazz and the rising drumbeat in his head, and his mother had only been stuffed straw and a fur coat, Jan nothing but a department store dummy. It was over. Even if he won, if he managed to outlast McVries and Stebbins and Baker, it was over. He was never going home again.
Yeah. I mean, this bit very much resonates with the, as a reference to the idea that the soldiers can never really come home from war.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can take a lot of metaphors from this story and talk about, all the different things it means, but I think it has to be absolutely just fundamentally true that this is certainly a metaphor for, soldiers going off to war. Like it is just it's so obvious to me that, and it slots so perfectly into that, especially with sentences like this one, that it's just like, this had to be on King's mind while he was writing the story.
Yeah. Undoubtedly.
Yeah. So this, at the end of this chapter, is when Baker turns to his friend Ray and asks him for a favor, his final favor. And this is one of the most heartbreaking moments in the story to me. Baker put a hand on Garrity's shoulder, and Garrity began weeping uncontrollably. It seemed that his heart would burst out of his chest and weep its own tears. Baker said, "Lead-lined." "Walk a little bit longer," Garrity said through his teeth. "Walk a little longer, Art." "No, I can't." "All right." "Maybe I'll see you, man," Baker said, and wiped slick blood from his face absently. Garrity lowered his head and wept.
Yeah. So much weight to all this.
Yeah.
I really was, or I kind of, you ever kind of lose track of your surroundings when you're reading or listening? That was what was happening to me during the whole last 2 or 3 chapters of this book, where I was so absorbed, I just like wasn't aware of anything except this, because it's just so good, and you have been pulled into this world so thoroughly, and you're so invested.
Yeah.
Just to react to this specific moment, I think I was almost ready to write off Garrity as having completely broken and having no compassion left, but he clearly still has compassion left, as we can see from his reaction here, and as we'll see in the next chapter. So
yeah, I mean, that's the not irony, but like, this is a system and a thing that would seemingly beat the humanity out of people, right? That's what we've talked about. That's the decision that they made. No help, do it on your own. Seems to be, even in that moment, Garrity said, "I'm not a human anymore. I'm just an animal. I'm just a tired, sick, shitty animal." But you're not. Like, you cannot even this cannot remove the humanity from these kids, that even in this moment, like, they still feel for each other. They still want to help each other. Like, he's breaking his promise right here. Walk a little bit longer, Art, but just come on. Like, he's encouraging him. He's trying to keep him going. He's trying to push him forward. He can't not like abandon his humanity. He can't.
Yeah.
And there is optimism there, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, and he's the guy who's going to win the walk. So somehow that's, I don't know what that says exactly, to be honest, that he's the guy who wins, I don't know.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about that.
Yeah.
All right. Chapter 18. This is our final chapter. It's a very short one. 6 pages stand between our characters and the end of the walk. There's only 3 of them left now. Garrity, McVries, and then good old Stebbins. Here we are, the final 3.
Yep. I just want to reiterate here at the beginning of the last chapter that this is a brilliant premise for a book.
Uh-huh.
Because you don't want any of these characters to die.
Yep.
But one of the, two of them have to. So you're like torn up, wondering who it's going to be, and for any one of them that you say, well, I don't want him to die, you're implicitly condemning the other two.
Yeah.
And so you just go in this endless round robin of like, well, I don't want him to die though. And I mean, yeah, it's just so great.
It is. It absolutely is. So Stebbins asks Garrity for a story, and he begins telling one, a fairy tale about a white knight who went on 100 quests, who slayed all kinds of monsters. When he returned to the castle, he asked permission to take the fair lady Gwendolyn out, but he was denied by the king, who said he will never, never, ever be good enough for the fair lady. This is the metaphor I was talking about earlier, Matt. This is pretty explicit, right? This is soldiers going off to war, kids going on the long walk. Did all these things, proved your worth, but you're never going to be good enough. The system will never think you're good enough.
Yep.
Ever.
Yep. Your princess is in another castle, Garrity.
Keep on walking.
Yep.
We don't get to see how the story ends, though, Matt, because as Ray goes on, he sees Pete sleepily walking towards the crowd. And like we already said, despite their agreement, Ray puts aside the promise he made and rushes to Pete to wake him up and set him straight, set him back on the road, kind of repaying the favor for all the times he's had it done to him. But Pete says no. He says it's time to sit down, calling back to that moment he talked about so many chapters ago where he would once reach his end and would just sit down. And so he does. And that's where we lose Pete McVries. Despite everything Garrity does to try to pick him back up and get him walking again, he doesn't have the strength. And when Pete says he wants to go, he's going to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just this incredible moment. Very well portrayed in the audiobook, by the way, that just it really communicated the pure desperation and sorrow that Garrity is feeling as he's just screaming at his friend to get up, but actually knowing that he's doomed and that he's not going to be able to change his mind, and just the hopelessness of it, just incredibly impactful.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't listened to it, of course, but it just leaps right off the page for me. It feels like, we talked earlier about like how difficult an adaptation of this book would have to be to capture everything that's seen here. It would be a tall order, but there's moments in it that I'm like, you could absolutely see this scene play out cinematically, for sure.
Totally.
All right, 2 left now, Matt. Ray is also kind of at the point of defeat. He kind of says to himself he can't outwalk Stebbins. Stebbins cannot be defeated, and he walks up to him, telling him so. Before he does this, we get this. He shambled along, bulge-eyed, jaw hanging agape, reins swishing in. For a misty shutter-like moment, he thought he saw someone he knew as well as himself, weeping and beckoning into the dark ahead. But it was no use. He couldn't go on.
Who could it be?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that when we get to the very end, right?
Okay.
Because that is a good question, Matt. So Ray walks up to Stebbins with the intent of telling him he's done. He can't go any further. Stebbins wins. But what he finds there, Matt, is Stebbins in his last panic, dying breath. He looks at Garrity. He says, "Oh, Garrity," and then he collapses and dies. And Garrity wins. Stebbins couldn't cut it.
Yeah, I mean, he did have his mental game on complete lock, but
yeah,
he had the strongest will, the strongest mind, but his body just broke, like a machine. Like we talked about a long time ago. Like you take a piece of steel and you bend it back and forth enough times, you can snap steel. And it doesn't matter how strong your mind is, your body's just made of matter. And he literally died on his feet. That's how strong his mind was. So
so Ray, ahead of him, the major stood in the jeep. He held a stiff salute, ready to grant first wish, every wish, any wish, death wish, the prize. Again, just wonderfully constructed sentence there. Those commas, just perfect.
Yeah.
But Ray doesn't stop, Matt. Ray keeps walking. He keeps walking towards the dark figure just ahead. The dark figure was back, up ahead, not far, beckoning. He knew that figure. If he could get a little closer, he could make out the features. Which one hadn't he walked down? Was it Barkovich? Collie Parker? Percy what's his name? Who was it? And that, Matt, is how the book ends, with Garrity somehow finding the strength to sprint down the road after the dark figure beckoning him ahead. Pretty ambiguous ending here. What do you make of it? What do you think is happening here at the end of our story?
Well, I think he's lost it. You know, I mean, I think we've established that he's mentally broken at this point. He's physically broken too, probably. I mean, whether or not he dies in 2 weeks, he's still physically maimed by this ordeal. And
is he dead? Is he dead now? Is this him being beckoned into the afterlife?
I don't think so. I mean, I mean, look, that's a totally valid reading. So if you're asking me what I think,
yes,
I don't think that he's dead. I think that he has won, and like I just love the image of like he's won, and the major like literally drives his Jeep into the street to signify it's over, you've won. And Garrity's thinking like, oh man, what kind of crazy person would drive their Jeep into the street in the middle of the walk? That's an instant, execution. And then he just walks around the Jeep because he's not going to stop. He's going to keep going. He's going to keep going until somebody physically tries to stop him. That's one thing I thought about the ending is like he leaves you to imagine like what happens next. Like does somebody try to come up to him and get him to stop? Does he fight them? Does he keep trying to run? You know, the last words, somehow he found the strength to run.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my God. Like, and I think I don't think it's the afterlife. I think it's more like, just some piece of himself that's broken off. You know, it's a hallucination is what it is. He can't bear the thought that it's over, or he can't conceive of it as being over. Like it's the specter of the war. Like the POW, comes home and now they're going to flinch at every firecracker and so forth. And it's like, he's always going to be in the long walk. He's always going to be, even if they truss him and take him home and, force feed him soup, he's always going to be in the long walk. That's what it is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that interpretation. That the eternal nature of it, the fact that, oh, now like you're just arbitrarily telling me it's over now, like it's just done, like this everything I've gone through and it's just done. And congrats, you won. You get to go home and live a normal life. And it's like a person can't perceive of that. And the figure doesn't have to be anything magical or metaphysical. It's just the delusion of an incredibly broken person seeing the person ahead of him. It says it right there, like just one more person to walk down. Like there's always going to be that beckoning, crying dark shadow ahead of him, urging him on, like, come on. Cause he's been so thoroughly broken by the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Would it shock you to learn that a lot of people don't like this ending?
No, not really, because it's one of those ambiguous endings that's sort of a intentionally hopeless, the end no moral type ending. Even though I think this book has a lot of moral content, it's a sort of it leaves you hanging. And again, I talked a long time ago in this coverage of this book about the idea that like, oh, maybe we'll get some kind of explanation. I think even there were points when I was like, well, clearly one of the mysteries that's being set up in this book is like, why is Garrity here? And I'm sure we're going to get some resolution to that. I think, to give myself credit, I might have said like, or not, and that's just like, it's just one of those books that's just going to tease you and leave you unsatisfied, and that turns out to be the case. And I can see people being frustrated by that because everybody's always frustrated with ambiguous endings. It's just, But I thought it was the only possible ending almost to this book, because that's the point. That's the book that we're in. We're in a book about the nature of war and humanity, and there's no victory. It's meaningless. It couldn't possibly be any other way.
Yeah, that's absolutely like what is it? What is a satisfying ending to the story, right? Because I agree with you, the ending is almost by its nature unsatisfying, and that is, I think, what leads to some people not liking it. The goal of the ending is to not leave you satisfied. It's to break you a little bit. The same with, Cormac McCarthy passed away yesterday, and we read Blood Meridian not too long ago, and that's not a satisfying ending either, right? That's an unsatisfying ending by design.
Yeah.
And it's like, how else could this have ended? Is the truth of it. Like, what is, like, is it more satisfying if Garrity wins and like realizes he wins, and like we get to see him hug Jan, or like, like get to see him like sit down and for the first time in 5 days he felt rest or something. Like, that's just not the story. Like, that's just not it. Like, we've been kind of primed for this from the very beginning, that like there is no winner here. This is a horrible, monstrous thing that is done every year, and everyone seems okay with it. And like the idea of a prize at the end of it is just kind of bullshit, because no one that lives to the end of this thing will ever be whole ever. And there's no thing you could ask for that could possibly make you whole. And it just, it's the only way. It's the only way. I think the only thing that I could kind of see is like the introduction of this inexplicable dark figure, like, just annoys some people to the point it's like, I want to know what that means. And the book doesn't explicitly tell you what that means. That bugs people, which is fine. It's fine that bugs people. But.
Yeah. I love one thing you just said about the nature of the wish and how that connects to this, or the wish, the prize. Because it's like, the prize, it's anything you could wish for. And earlier in the book, you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, what does that mean? Like, surely there are limits. And you're getting all nerdy and technical about it. Or at least I was. And it's like, no. Like, the point is that there is nothing that can make them whole, is what you just said. There is nothing that can make them whole. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it's a joke. It's a joke, the idea that like, yeah, you can wish for anything you want, and you're never going to be even as good as well off as you were when you started the race. No matter what we give you, we can give you the world, and you'll still be broken for the rest of your life. I think that's just so delightfully evil.
Yeah, it is. It's remarkably evil. This whole system is terrible. And I mean, I guess the question is, when we talk about the prize, like, is that motivating enough that like, if they took that piece of it away, like no one would do it? Probably, right? Like, there has to be some sort of carrot, even if it's a bullshit, rotten carrot.
Yeah, I think if they took away the prize, it wouldn't. I mean, if they replaced the prize with like $1 million or something, it would be interesting to see what the effect of that would be, hypothetically, because for a 16-year-old boy, it's actually difficult for them to distinguish between $1 million and anything you could possibly want. Even though, an older person would ask for, at least $5 million, right? But because you got to be able to invest it such that the dividends. Anyway,
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I don't know. It's
yeah. I think the last thing I want to talk about on this ending, and we can revisit this next week when we talk about the book as a whole. But like, one of the questions you talked about earlier was like, well, okay, so Raymond Garrity won, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Yeah,
and like, that is, I think, one of my favorite things about this book, actually, is because he's not the most well prepared. He's not the most strategic. He's not the most physically fit. He's not the one with the most to lose. He's not the one with the biggest incentive. He's just a normal person.
Mhm.
He's not special in any way at all, and yet he is the one that wins. And what does that say? It says that this whole thing's bullshit.
Yeah.
It says that there's no rhyme or reason to it. That this is just the way it happens sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, the guy who everybody thought was going to win came down with the cold.
Yeah.
There's no fairness. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just nonsense. It's just like it's nothing. There's nothing you can do truly to prepare you for it. And that's life, right? Like we talked about that a few weeks ago, right? That's like sometimes you just get sick. Sometimes you pull your ankle. Sometimes you step on your foot wrong and roll something. It's just like it's just nothing. And like that is the true cruelty of it all, is that, like, I don't know, when soldiers go to war, right? To extend this metaphor for like why does the one marching ahead of you get shot in the head and you don't? Like, why? Is it because you had more training? No. Is it because you were smarter? No. It's because they were there and you were here, and that's it. That's it.
Yeah, could have been you just as easily, and that's an incredibly hard thing to just accept and move on with your life.
Yeah. Why did Raymond Garrity win? Because he lasted a second longer than Stebbins did.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I was going to say something about like Roland and like being a character who is like profoundly unreflective and does not look ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really think that, like, I think what you said is closer to the themes of this book. I think it's almost a coincidence that Roland happens to be a character who, walks for a long period of time. It's not. I don't think there's that much of a thematic connection there. Honestly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely think we should still think about it, and we have the opportunity next week to reflect on the book once more. So we'll think if we come up with any other ideas around that. But that to me is one of my favorite parts about the book, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is The Long Walk. As we said, we'll be doing our overview episode next week, where we'll spend an hour or so talking about the book as a whole. But this is it for the in-depth coverage. We did it, Matt. We walked the walk. Are you exhausted?
I'm exhausted. Yes, I'm ready to sit down.
All right. Let's do our discussion question from 2 weeks ago real quick. We're going a little bit long here, so let's go through these answers real quick.
Real quick. Yeah. So the question was, if you were in the long walk, what would your strategy be? From Pear Jane, I think I'd win by going as slow and steady as possible, staying just ahead of the slowest walker, because I don't want to be the pacer. And if I'm going to go, I would either put on a burst of speed and run it until I pass out, or pull a scram and have a seat and sing to myself loudly so I don't hear the warnings until it's too late.
I like it.
Yeah.
Philgard 007 says, backpack with a second set of shoes for sure. The idea of having to maintain that speed in socks is a big no sir to me, but I feel like having a lightweight set of shoes in a pack would be worth it. That being said, if I made it to the point I needed a second pair of shoes, I'd be shocked.
Yeah, me too. Dolan Jones, honestly, I have no idea what my winning strategy would be. King's books are often spooky, but rarely actually scare me, the only exception so far being Pet Sematary. That is, until now. The long walk terrifies me to my core. The idea of forcing myself to keep walking through unimaginable pain, exhaustion, and hunger, knowing there's no escape other than death if I stop walking, is horrific. At least in things like the Hunger Games, there's agency. You can fight, or at least try to. The long walk is just brutal and relentless, and if I was forced into it, I honestly don't know that I'd be able to make myself walk and not just get shot at the starting line.
Yeah. I think let's make this a topic for next week. Is this one of the worst of these type of stories?
Or
I think there's a good argument for that.
Yeah, I agree.
Insane Blind Tart says, "Can I use a mobility scooter?" No. In all seriousness, though, I would either get killed early on, or failing that, take down the other contestants until I'm the last remaining. There you go.
Yeah, great. Revolutionary Lie 544 says, this is my first comment to you guys. I found your podcast a few months ago, and it has taken this long to catch up with you, starting with The Dark Tower. The answer to your question is both easy and hard. Simply put, my strategy would be to do as much preparation as possible. The long answer is start with clothing, lightweight but layers, a light bag so I can switch clothes out easily. Shoes and socks are the most important. Next is practice. Take long walks to learn practice. Time everything I do so I can learn to do it in less than 2 minutes. This includes going to the bathroom and changing clothes. It is such a pleasure listening to you guys. You are awesome. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. That's a good answer. It's a good answer.
Yeah. This is more thought than I would put into it. Thank you.
I think this next answer is going to have a lot of thought too. Tepid Gruel says, in competition, we do not rise to the occasion. We just fall back on our training. The bitter work begins at age 12. Move to Utah, near Zion National Park. Get out in the desert and get toasty. There is no tree cover on US Route 1. Plow through the Narrows every day after school, barefoot. Smash your feet on the rocks until they're as tough as a Shaolin monk. Bust out a rim-to-rim Grand Canyon hike every day of every summer. Sometimes wear shoes, sometimes go unshod. Always give your feet and legs a good pounding. Put those mules to shame. Every day is leg day at the gym. Knees of iron, calves of steel, arms of toy-grade balsa wood. All mass is useful mass. Also, Pilates, core of steel. You have a passion for shoes and socks. Scour shoe shops. Interview podiatrists. Serenade your poor friends with podiacal rhapsodies. Get obsessed. Gear up. A contraband military pocket speedometer. A rain poncho. Carbon fiber trekking poles. Medical moleskin. 3 extra pairs of new stocks. Stebbins moccasins. And of course, the best shoes known to science. Every 6 months, do a 48-hour practice walk at competition pace, but do not attempt until 14 years of age. Be a good little citizen on those written screening tests. Big Brother just wants to know you won't be making a scene on camera.
Oh,
well,
okay.
I think Tepid Gruel's going to win until he gets pneumonia.
Yeah.
On day 2.
Yeah, he steps on a really sharp rock that's just sharp enough to go through his heavy calluses.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, I don't know that you could practice doing a 48-hour walk. Like, I think you need a gun behind you to actually make you do that. Maybe you're more mentally strong than me, but I could not do that.
I could not either.
Yeah.
How long do you think you could walk for?
3 hours. I mean, not long. My feet would actually start like blistering at a certain point, and then I'd just be like, all right, I'm done. I mean, I could walk longer, but it would suck. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I went to DC with my wife a few years ago, and I was wearing not good shoes for it. And I just remember, like, at the end of day 1, just being like, I don't want to walk anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many miles that was, but it was not that many.
Yeah. Steve Living Room says, train hard. Extra shoes is a great idea. Extra socks, rain jacket, protein bars and gels, dried fruit, big bucket hat, walking sticks. Most of all, get super zen, completely close out the world around me and go and stay deep into myself. Stay awake just enough to walk, eat, drink, and switch clothes when necessary. Yeah, that was one thing I briefly thought about, is the idea that like you could actually sort of train your mind via meditation to just not feel the physical suffering. But I think the book very strongly makes the point that it doesn't matter if you feel the massive embolism that kills you. So,
do you think you're allowed to use walking sticks? That's the second person who said walking sticks.
I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, probably not, but like,
because they
I don't know how well those would work on road anyway, right? I guess you would still be able to lean on them.
I've heard that they make you more efficient regardless. So I would think they'd either be outlawed or everyone would be using them.
That's fair. It's fair. Complicated 9519 says, I don't think I'd mentally be able to last that long into the walk for a strategy. I do my best to last as long as possible, but I think once I got tired, once the sun set, I'd just give up. But I'd set small milestones for myself in the meantime. I'm not going to be the first to die, that's for sure. I'd at least go far enough that someone else would die before me. But I'd set milestones like X people dead, this road marker, or that one, and simple stuff like that. I'd be drinking so much water, I'd honestly think I'd rack up warnings just slowing down to pee, and I doubt my bowel movements would want to cooperate. I'd probably die pooping.
Yeah, I'd definitely die pooping, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
eman9001 says, I have run 2 marathons, and like Scott, I always have to compare my experience to the long walk. However, I didn't run a regular marathon and instead was thrusted into a freakish circus sideshow bullshit race. My old school has an event every year where people will run the entire 26.2 mile marathon around the track, 105 laps. the spectators watching all along the football field and the bleachers. This
oh
was
my God.
This was absolutely mind-numbing as I saw the same scenery for hours and hours. Also, it's awful on your hip turning the same direction for that long. The positive side was even the people who ended up at a much slower pace were still running with you because we were all on the same track. That sense of it being all of us against the track really helped me push through on the first day. So my strategy would be to get a core group of best friends, and we would all travel together and help each other survive and endure the entire walk. I would know them intimately. Then, when it came down to just us, I would use the slow psychological profiles I spent the last 2 days building of my former friends and soon-to-be victims to plot their downfall. How hard can it be to push people that close to death over the edge? So, in short, step 1, friendship. Step 2, complete and utter betrayal of their trust. Bonus strategy, Heelys? Oh, my God.
Oh my God. I can't imagine running a marathon on a track. Fucking kill me. 105 laps. I would die.
I would lose track.
Yeah.
I would lose track after 10.
I would just get so fucking bored. I hate running on tracks. We had to run on tracks for marathon training and I hated it.
Yeah.
Burning Beard 138 says, my strategy? Get shot immediately. Because what's the point to it all anyway? Long walk, life, all meaningless.
That's the spirit.
Cormac? Was that you?
Yeah, is that you? Hey, would you try to put on a lot of weight so that you could have calories to burn? Or would you try to lose as much weight as possible so that your frame weighs very little so that you're doing less damage to your joints?
That's a good question. I don't know. I feel like the long-term strategy is to keep the joint wear and tear to an absolute minimum.
And I think supporting that is that all successful distance runners are basically emaciated at all times.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the honest truth is that I wouldn't make it very far, Matt. I just don't think so.
No, I wouldn't.
I'd like to think I could at least do 26.2 miles since I know I've done that before. But
yeah, I think it would be optimistic for me to say that I would live past like the 5th ticket. But anyway, I'm not going to sign up for the long walk.
So I think if it's gonna if it's at long walk pace but marathon distance, that's 6.5 hours roughly.
Okay.
So that's about how long I think I can make it. So if the long walk starts at 9 a.m., I'm fucking gone before 4.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much for everyone that sent those in. I know we had to wait a couple weeks to answer those, but I'm glad we did. That was very fun. Next week, because it is a overview episode, we do not have a discussion question, but we are going to do a mailbag. It's been a couple of months since we've done one of those. So this is the point of the show, if you're new, where we answer your questions. They can be questions about the long walk. They can be questions about Stephen King. They can be questions about anything at all. So we will answer as many of those questions as we possibly can on next week's overview episode. So send them in. You can, of course, send them in over on Reddit at r/doofmedia or email them or, I don't know, cloud writing.
Yeah, that would be cool. We've never had that before.
But yeah, that's going to do it for us this week. As we said, we're wrapping up the long walk next week and doing that mailbag.
Yeah. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod, at the subreddit at r/doofmedia, and of course, cloud writing.
If you're not already subscribed, we strongly recommend you do so. We are heading into Derry, Maine in just a couple weeks, beginning with Stephen King's It. So you don't want to miss that. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, pretty much anywhere in the world that there are podcasts, we will be there.
That's right. And if you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. You saw an example last week of the sort of stuff that we release over there in the form of that episode of Other Levels of the Tower, where we discussed, I forgot, what was it?
Creep Show is what I released
Creep
last
Show.
week.
Yes, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Special thanks to new patrons Shane L, Jasmine W, Elizabeth L, Brian M, Ian F, and Kevin F. Welcome. We hope you continue to enjoy the cool stuff we have over there on the Patreon.
Yeah, I believe we have a new Other Levels of the Tower coming up soon. We've got to get back on track with our schedule, Matt, after a time off, but there should be one soon-ish.
Yes.
Of course, if you cannot afford to join the community, that is absolutely okay. You are still part of it just by listening, and you can help us out just by sharing this podcast with all your Stephen King loving friends. You can, of course, also help us by leaving a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. This week's Spotlight review comes from Jesse Lee Reader, who gives us 5 stars and says 5 stars is not enough. I wish I could give this podcast all the stars in the sky. Matt, I don't know if you know that. That's a lot of stars.
That's quite a sentiment.
Mm-hmm. I listen to a lot of different types of podcasts, and this one has quickly become one of my all-time favorites. I took my first journey to the tower in my early 20s. Now reaching 40, I'd listened to the audiobooks over the past couple of years up to the Wasteland. Then I heard about Kingslingers on the Kingcast and decided to check it out. I was immediately hooked and went back to the Gunslinger and started listening along. The format of the show is so good, with one host, Scott, being a constant reader, and the other, Matt, being a complete newbie. After almost 20 years, there were a lot of things I'd forgotten on the series, so it was great to not have any spoilers, but also see if I could remember if Matt's predictions were correct. Plus, their analysis of the books is fun, insightful, and has brought me a whole new way of looking at King's works. I'm so glad they decided to do a season 2, and I've been loving every minute of it. I just finished Low Men in Yellow Coats, so I've got a long way to catch up, but I'm dreading the day when I have to wait a week between each episode. Highly recommend this podcast to anyone taking their first or 40th trip to the Dark Tower and beyond. Well, Jesse, that was so nice of you.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to reach out to our friends at the Kingcast and thank them personally.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I was just thinking that. You ever notice that constant readers are really good, like, writers of appreciative prose?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
All your reviews are so nice, everyone. Especially yours, Jesse. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. It's good to be back and getting to read people say nice things about me once a week. It's really encouraging.
That's what it's all about.
No, we love you guys. Thank you so much, and thank you for sending those reviews in. Please keep them coming. We are done for the week, but we will be back next week to finish off the long walk and to begin to prepare for Stephen King's It. Oh my God, it's going to be an exciting 6 months.
Nice.
Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.